Good evening and welcome. My name is Ginger Fay, and I'm one of the directors at Appleroof, which is a test prep and tutoring company based in Atlanta and working with students all over the country and around the world. It is our pleasure and our privilege to be able to work with students who are going through an important time of transition in their lives. And one of the things we feel called to do as a company is to provide as many resources and access to those resources as we can to everybody out there who might be thinking and hoping about college. Most people who are thinking and hoping about college are wondering about the cost of college. So that's the topic we're going to dive into tonight with the help of my friend and colleague, Claire Law. And we're excited to kind of have this chance to be together. This is the opening night of a three-part series on college and money. Tonight, we're going to talk about how to make college affordable and thinking about controlling the cost of college. The colleges aren't doing a great job of controlling their costs, so how you can control it from the consumer side. Next week, we'll be joined by another wonderful friend and colleague, Chanel Thomas, who is Associate Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships at Vanderbilt University. And batting third in 2 weeks is Will Geiger, who's leading a website called Scholarships 360, which helps students search for merit scholarships. So it's the 1-2-3 punch for how to make college affordable. I hope you can join us for all of the events. If you're not able to take notes tonight or stay on the whole evening when there are many demands on our time with homework and homework helping and all kinds of things, feel free to take advantage of the fact that we will share the recording of tonight's presentation with you, and Claire is generously going to provide her slides as well. So stay tuned, take notes, but if you need to revisit it later, we will be sharing that recording out with everyone. I want to let you know that you can put your questions in the Q&A box as they occur to you, and Claire and I will do our best to squeeze in as many answers in the next hour as we possibly can. But first, we wanted to ask you a question. So we're going to launch a quick poll to find out a little bit about who's with us tonight. So we'd love to know if you're a student, if you're a parent or guardian or advocate for a student, or if you're an educator like us. And if you are a student or a family member, what grade is that student in high school? Or is it that you are way ahead of the game and you're working on saving for college with a middle schooler? Or you might already be a college student and thinking about transferring or how to make sure that you can finish your degree in an affordable way. So if you can answer those two questions for us, we'd love to get a chance to get to know you. While you are answering those questions, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Claire. So Claire Law, who is our guest speaker tonight, is a nationally recognized expert in college admissions and college financial aid. Over the last 20 years, she's been helping teens identify educational avenues that fit their strengths, their needs and wants, and how to make those colleges affordable for their parents. I have been lucky to know Claire and work with her for a long time as a friend and colleague, and I've been particularly grateful for her generosity in sharing her experience working in college admissions, as well as working for a Sallie Mae lender. She knows the inside scoop. So this is your chance to ask questions and get real answers. Claire has written 2 books about the college process. One is based on her experience as a certified Myers-Briggs type indicator professional, and that's finding the college that's right for you. And she most recently has written How to Control Your College Costs, which I know is a terrific book because I got to preview one of the chapters. So I'm grateful that she would share her resources and information with us tonight. So with that said, we're going to close the poll and hopefully get a sense, if we can publish those results, we'll have a sense of what the group is. So it looks like we've got mostly parents and guardians with us tonight, but a mix of students. We love you. We're so glad you're here. And educators. And it looks like just over half are in or around junior year of high school. So thank you. That's incredibly helpful for us as we get started. So without further ado, please welcome Claire Law.
Thank you, Ginger. It's so good to be all with you tonight. Wonderful to see you. I am going to talk about how to make college affordable. And I believe that regardless of how much money you have or don't have, you still need to control your college costs, and you need to have some very basic strategies under your belt. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the global picture. Nationally, we have 1.6 trillion of outstanding federal loans. So what is the return on investment? That is the biggest question. We have a large amount of federal student loan debt, although the borrowers are making repayments, so it's not all defaulted stuff. There are 43 million borrowers who owe on the average $40,000. Now, graduate students borrow the most, but the picture looks bleak. But in fact, if you really knew the facts, the Federal Department of Education is actually making money on loans. Now, this 1.6 trillion doesn't take into consideration the private loans that parents and graduate students may have taken out. We don't know how much that is. But I want to tell you that given the increasing costs of college, you know about that because you're here tonight. The ability to continue to college may depend upon the availability of financial aid. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about financial aid, but first I want to tell you about the cost of attendance at very well-known colleges. So for example, I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of my students. I'm going to talk to you about Jamie. When she came to me, she didn't know the difference between the costs at a in-state university versus out of state. So for example, for Jamie, who lives here in Charleston, College of Charleston is about $12,938. If someone else, let's say you live in Georgia or New England or the Southeast or Southwest, an out-of-state student would pay $34,239. This is just tuition. It doesn't take into account the housing, which I've averaged out to about $15,000, unless you're going to school in a high-priced metropolitan area such as New York or Los Angeles. The student fees such as the technology fee, student fee, activities fee. The transportation is variable depending on how far you live from the college, book supplies, etc. So if you're looking at in-state university, like for instance, University of Michigan for Michiganians is $12,440, but it's 2.5 as much if you're from out of state. JMU's tuition is about $12,000, but it's more like $28,000 if you're from out of state, plus all of these secondary indirect costs. So you can already see that your in-state public institution is probably going to cost less right off the bat. I know the sticker price is not what you'll pay, but don't ignore your in-state university. I have here in South Carolina, I have students who may be looking at Auburn or Bama, University of Alabama, instead of even touring University of South Carolina or Clemson. So look inside your state first if you really want to control costs. And then if you want to evaluate private universities, you need to realize that they're very expensive. New York universities is nearly $80,000. The Ivies, all of them cost between $70,000 and $82,000. Now, you have even universities that are not Ivies cost quite a bit. And sometimes it's very hard to figure out what the real cost of attendance is because the website breaks down the costs by the meals, by the type of housing, by the fees. So you have to add everything piecemeal. But there is one good thing that the Department of Education now is going to insist that colleges cite the cost of, for instance, board based on 21 meals a week. No more will the colleges be able to say, oh, well, if you're on the 10 meal a week plan, it's this much, and 15 meals a plan is that much. No, it's going to be uniform. But so the cost of attendance, as you can see, is high. And the return on investment is really important because you want to be able to graduate and you want to be able to pay back whatever loans you have. But in any case, you want to get into a gainful sort of employment. And what I've found is that the college major you go into is really, really important. That will determine whether your degree is going to be worth it, whether you're going to be able to support yourself when you graduate. Now, I have a friend, Lynn, and her eighth grader, Jack, is thinking of college already. And so my friend Lynn says, well, this is too much money. I'm going to have him become a pipe fitter or an electrician or get a degree or a certificate in heating and ventilation. And I say, fine, if that's where he wants to do. When I work with students, I make sure that they understand themselves and who they are, so that before they go to college, I administer a number of assessments. There's no right or wrong answers to these assessments, but they are beneficial in that it helps students understand which college majors would be compatible with their strengths and what sort of careers they could go into. So for example, if my friend Lynn's son is an ISTJ, that's a practical, I'm talking about Myers-Briggs type indicator terms, but the sensing thinker is interested in practical skills, in knowledge that can be applied, whereas the intuitive feeler is interested in creativity, in moral development. So they'll be good as counselors, human resource managers, arts and writing and journalism, anything that allows them to be creative. Now, think about the pilot or the engineer or the skilled tradesman. They use repetition to become better and better. I don't know if you remember that a few years ago, Sully, I think his name was Sullenberger, he landed a plane on the Hudson River. And when the reporter asked him, how did you do it? He said, I did it 1,000 times in the military. I told everybody brace for impact. I knew if I could land the tail first and the body and the nose of the plane after, I could do it. So the pilot, if he is an ISTJ or a sensing thinker person who likes repetition, will get better and better. But if you ask the creative person to engage in a profession or a major that requires a lot of repetition, they might get bored and actually do a worse job. So when I look at the students' innate abilities, their self-efficacy, their resilience, and put it all together, I have this conversation with students about the best college major for them, the type of college that would be a good match, type of careers that it might lead to, because again, people tend to be more satisfied when they can use what comes natural to them. So what are the starting questions that families should ask themselves? Well, if you're concerned about college costs, and who isn't, then the question is, to what extent will money affect the process? If you're a student, are you willing to consider a college that may be less higher ranked, but cost a lot less? Because at a lesser ranked college, you will still get an excellent education, but will get more scholarships and actually it could be a big fish in a small pond, like Michael Gladwell always says, be a big fish in a small pond than a small teeny tiny fish in a big pond. And then some students, when they start with me, they are not flexible. They are in name brand paralysis. A football player wants to play Division I when it's so hard and already has had injuries. So if he plays on a major football team with bigger and more trained players, he might actually not feel so good, whereas he could play at a Division II or III football and never be benched. So there are choices that students have to make. If they're not in name brand paralysis, then they can open up to the variety of educational avenues that may be available to them. The other thing is family budget. When you walk to a dealership and look at the parking lot, are you looking at Porsches or are you looking at Audis or Maseratis? Or are you the type of student who would be happy enough to get from point A to point B in a slightly used Subaru that is reliable and efficient and doesn't put you into debt? Now, parents calculate what they can afford to pay for a house, a car, a boat. College sometimes gets left at the last minute. Colleges are very good at evaluating families in certain situations. So they wonder, what are the resources of the families? How much can the parents pay? And so then the parents have to figure out, well, how much do colleges think we can pay? Now, colleges also expect students to contribute to the cost of education because students don't just have they don't have the bills, the rent, the mortgage, the lights and heat, all those bills to pay. Their first concern should be to help pay for college. Some have to work to help the family get along, and that is even harder for them than to be able to afford college. So, like I said, to go to college, you want to be able to get the most, so you want to be ready, you want to be college ready, and you want to be able to take advantage of everything that the college offers. I advise everybody to file the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, to see what type of federal aid you might qualify for. So now I'm going to talk about two major categories of aid: merit-based and need-based. So need-based aid is awarded based on the financial need of the applicant and the family. So, but merit-based, as the word implies, is really based on talent, academic ability, a special recognition. Maybe you are a musician, or you can play in the band, or an athlete, or a singer, a dancer, who knows? We all have our own talents, but merit-based is awarded regardless of the family's resources. Now remember, financial aid is intended to supplement, not replace, the financial resources of the family. Colleges engage in what's called need analysis, and the principle it's based upon is that to the extent that they're able, parents have the primary responsibility to pay for the education of their dependent children. Under 18 years of age, they don't yet have a degree, a bachelor's degree, but students also have a responsibility to help pay for their educational costs. Under FAFSA, free application for federal student aid, families are evaluated in their present financial condition on the day that they file FAFSA. It's a snapshot taken at one point in time. Not so if the college requires the CSS profile, because they'll want to know what was your income 2 years ago, a year ago, current income, and what do you expect it to be in the future. So if you're going to many of those colleges, there are about 300 colleges that will require the CSS profile. They're usually elite colleges. Then much more information is given up by the family. But the basic formula is based on econometric methods like horizontal equity, vertical equity. Horizontal means the same family with the same circumstances should get the same award letter as this one. Vertical equity mean if someone has a special circumstance or a unique situation, then the financial aid award should reflect those different situations. And this is where it all unravels, because it is very difficult to assess equitably the financial situation of each and every family. So you still need to go to college. You need a bachelor's degree or at least an associate degree from a community college. And it's true that college paves the way to a better life. College will overall, over your lifetime, enable you to earn more. And even though I've shown you all those prices, rest assured that the sticker price is not what you'll pay if you file all the financial aid forms. Now, I said students have an obligation to contribute, and if a family files the FAFSA, students, undergraduate students, will be awarded the direct loan. And the direct loan means that a student, 17, 18, 19 years old, will be awarded $5,500 in first year, $6,500 in second year, and $7,500 in third and fourth year. Now, this is the student's obligation to repay. There is no cosigner. The federal government is betting that these students will graduate in 4 years with a bachelor's degree and will repay the loan. So if they take out all those loans every year, students graduate with a balance of about $27,000 plus interest. And it is worse when students go to school and leave without a degree. Those students should have gone to community college. Emerging learners could have taken community college courses and gotten away with the core, English, math, science, for very little money. So it's important to have these conversations within the family. And if a student goes to a four-year university, in-state, out-of-state, or a private university, the parents end up paying the majority of the cost. So you don't want your parents to be paying until they're 89 years of age, right? So you want to be able to be flexible depending on your family situation. So higher education is going to improve people's lives in the long run. Choose your major very wisely. Be sure you're college ready. And there are people who occasionally get a degree that doesn't allow them to earn enough to pay back the loans. So you have to look at that return on investment, like I said. So I'm going to talk to you about financial aid. When you file financial aid, you are going to be evaluated for the level of need, demonstrated need that you have. So remember I showed you the costs of attendance at in-state, out-of-state, and private schools, right? So the cost of attendance includes tuition, direct costs, and indirect costs like transportation, books and supplies, room and board. When you add it all up, that makes up the cost of attendance. Then the formulas try to assess your family's expected financial contribution, which is soon to be called Student Aid Index by the federal government. And the difference is the financial need. Now, do families pay only their EFC? No, they pay a lot more than their EFC. And why is the expected family contribution now called Student Aid Index? Well, FAFSA is really there to assess if someone is Pell eligible. The Pell Grant has been a stalwart in awarding free aid to exceptionally needy students. And hopefully it will continue to grow as the costs increase. But the Student Aid Index is a rough estimate of what a family can afford to pay. And if a family is not eligible for the Pell Grant, then they won't be eligible for a little bit of supplemental educational grant. They may not even be eligible for a little bit of subsidized loan. So the FAFSA, the federal government, doesn't have to ask you any more questions than that, because the rest is all loans. Loans for students, loans for parents. And yes, they're considered financial aid because students can borrow without any credit, and parents can borrow up to the full cost of education minus whatever merit aid and loan the student has taken out. So I want to spend a little bit more talking about how demonstrated need varies on the cost of attendance. So imagine that school number one is an elite Ivy University, let's say costs $80,000 a year. Let's say that school number two is an out-of-state university, costs 60,000. And this one is your in-state, your in-state university that is, I don't know, 35,000. And let's say that the family, after the family has evaluated their income, assets, savings, that they can pay about $30,000 a year. All right, so how much need does this family demonstrate at the elite expensive university? Well, we said this was 80,000 minus 30,000, so we're talking about a $40,000 need, demonstrated need. Here it would be about 20, and here would be about 5. Of course, if this student goes to a community college, because it's infinitely less expensive than $30,000 a year, I think you can go to community college for $6,000 or $7,000 a year. So this student would have no demonstrated need at a community college. And then if a student goes to their in-state institution, they might get some state aid, which would fill this, and then the family would only pay the EFC. When a student family is allowing the student to apply to an $80,000 a year school, the family needs to know what is expected of them based on their income and assets. If this college expects the student's family to pay, let's say, $65,000 a year, the family should realize that they're not being treated preferentially. So this is a gap. Most families pay their EFC, their expected contribution, and a little bit of gap. Now, if it's a big gap, then the family is really stretching their budget and could cause the student to drop out if the family can continue to pay those prices. But this area here is the area of negotiation. When you're talking with a financial aid administrator and you're raising issues of affordability, you need to know what can you afford and how much are you being gapped. Now, they won't tell you that right off the bat, but the question to ask a financial aid administrator is, how am I being assessed? On what basis do you think that I can pay $60,000 a year? Now, if you want to figure out what could be your expected family contribution, you can launch a browser, type EFC calculator, and 9 times out of 10, you find yourself on the College Board, and it'll be EFC calculator, and if you enter all your information as carefully as you can, you'll get your EFC, your expected contribution under the federal methodology, which all schools use, and then also the institutional methodology, which is represented by the CSS profile, which the elite colleges use. So that can give you an idea for what someone in your income bracket would be expected to pay. Now, I explain all this in How to Control Your College Costs in detail. But the thing is, if you tell a college that, let's say your EFC is 40,000 and you tell them you can only afford 20, the college might say, this family is not willing to pay, or this family just doesn't know what they're saying. Or if you're saying, well, I can pay $55,000 a year, then the college might say, how come they have so much more? Maybe they have funds and resources that we haven't even considered. So you have to know what is your whereabouts, right? And so in my book, I talk about the family budget. If you have a family budget, you will be able to understand where your money goes and what you can pay. So it's just the same as when you were buying a house or a car. And I explained that. I can send you the family budget sheet if you want to look at it. Essentially, it's a budget sheet that deducts all the taxes and deductions and adds back in your non-taxable income that you might have contributed to a 401k or an IRA. So I can send that to you. But so I hope, Ginger, that people are understanding the importance of the EFC, the
For
family
sure.
contribution.
And I know you want to tell us a little bit about Jamie, but let's try and hear her story sort of quickly so we can get to the questions that I know people
Uh,
are asking. So keep the
oh,
questions coming in the chat so that we can
okay.
address all of those before the hour is up.
Okay. So Jamie came to me and she was very interested in going to a drama school in England. She had been at an art school and she loved the theater. She'd had major roles in Morning Becomes Electra, It's All in Your Head, Harry Potter. She played Professor Quirrell and narrator number 5. She she played in so many plays, Antigone, blah blah blah, and she was convinced that the only school for her was the Royal, what was it, the Royal Central School of Drama, School of Speech and Drama in London, because Judi Dench graduated from there and other memorable British actors graduated from there. So she was so much fun to talk to, and she really wanted me to help her. She suffered from what I call brand name paralysis. Her mother said that she didn't even get up on time for the school bus. She always had to drive her because she was late. And mom said, how can you go to school in England if you don't even get yourself up on time for the school bus? So I said to Jamie, well, if you want to really go to this British school of speech and drama, your dad's English, right? Your dad's from England. Maybe you could get British citizenship. Maybe I thought maybe she could be a resident. She said, yeah, sure. So her mom said, well, then you have to demonstrate that you can do it on your own. And to her credit, she did all of the paperwork and went to the consular offices, did the whole thing until she got British citizenship. Meanwhile, she was speaking with the director of admission at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. And so I said, Jamie, ask her what the cost will be now that you're a British citizen. Well, she didn't call me back for weeks. And I thought, what's going on? So I texted her and I said, hey, what was the result? And the result was in this very cryptic message, which is so very unlike Jamie, that even though she was a British citizen, she was not a resident. And so she would have to pay the international fees, which would be $50,000 a year plus another £13,000 a year just to find a place to live in London and get something to eat. So she was crestfallen. And when she came in, she was like so discouraged. There was a puddle of tears on the floor. She would have won all sorts of Tony Awards or Emmys or Grammys. Just, she really ought to be a comedic actress. So anyway, once that was done and she realized how impossible that was, I could then work with her relative to US schools and study abroad programs. So I sent her to visit several schools. She worked with me. She almost went to Oglethorpe University because they have a good theater program. They were almost going to give her a $20,000 scholarship, $2,000 to the mom if she filed FAFSA by October 1st. And there were other goodies there. They were even going to give her $5,000, which is the life scholarship she would have lost had she gone out of state. But then she went to visit Winthrop and she had a great interview with the drama teachers. She auditioned, she had a great audition. I think she got something like $3,000 from the theater department. She got the $5,000 in-state scholarship, which is available in Georgia under the Hope Scholarship, in Florida under the Bright Futures. So don't ignore your state scholarships. And it was an in-state university on the tip of the border with North Carolina. Then her ACT was rather low, so I persuaded her mom to let her prep until she brought it up to 19. And then we found out that if she brought it up to 22, she could get $2,000 a year from Winthrop University. So her mom sent her back for a couple of private ACT lessons. And guess what? She brought it up to a 23. So she got $2,000 a year, the life scholarship. Mom had a very small 529 plan. She, I think, disbursed maybe $4,000 or $5,000 a year. Gemma worked for Chick-fil-A, so she got $2,000 a year every year. So that was $8,000. Never neglect to look at employer benefits. There are some companies that have them. We did have to talk with the financial aid administrator to make sure that the outside scholarship was allocated to Jamie's portion of the loans, not the scholarship that they were already giving her, because colleges have the prerogative to do that. And she also looked for scholarships with associations from Kiwanis, Rotary, and blah, blah, blah. So she did pretty well. And then because her dad lost his job in second and third year, she became Pell eligible. So she then got the Pell and she graduated in 4 years and she studied abroad. She studied in London. She studied in London in sophomore year, and then she studied in London again in junior year. So she was in London for a year and a half, paying in-state tuition from Winthrop. I mean, it was just so incredibly affordable. When she graduated, she had almost maybe $10,000 in direct loans, but her friends had the $27,000 because they'd taken out the full amount of student loans plus fees and interests. And so the repayment over 10 years would be about about $300 a month. And the parents, those who had sent their kids to expensive schools, were paying a lot more, and then the siblings ended up going to less expensive schools. So families can be taken into the financial aid process and lose sight of their own resources. So they really, regardless of how much you make, you really do want to be able to allocate funds. They're your funds, your hard-earned money. You have every right to spend it any way you want, regardless of what the colleges tell you have to pay to send your kid there. So, is the cost of a college for you low, medium, or high? You will find a ton of information at the National Center for Education Statistics. It's also called College Navigator. It'll give you a ton of information. You will be able to compare colleges. You'll be able to get a nice, essentially you will see the retention rate, how much debt students graduate with. So don't forget this website. Another website is the besides College Navigator, excuse me.
Claire, why don't we jump into some of these questions? I think you've got
the scorecard.
Great resources for folks to follow up with, but I want to make sure that we can answer some of the questions we're getting live. So if you want to jump into the lightning round of questions. So can you talk a little bit about how retirement assets are taken into consideration when a family applies for financial aid?
Okay, retirement assets are not counted. Colleges will ask you how much you have in retirement. And I think that if you have millions in retirement, it'll probably create a certain impression. But retirement funds are not counted in any of the two formulas, the federal or institutional. The only thing that's counted is the amount that you contributed in the year that you filed the form. So if you had a pre-tax contribution of, let's say, you contributed $20,000 to a 401k or an IRA, that will be added to your adjusted gross income and will increase your expected contribution, if that makes sense. But otherwise, retirement funds are not evaluated. No, they're not counted.
Thank you. And how about a 529 plan? So 529 plans, if you're not familiar with them, are named after the line of IRS code that created them. And it's a way that you can save money for college or just education related expenses. And they're very flexible. You can change who the beneficiary is, which is to say if your kids wind up getting terrific scholarships for college, you can keep it for yourself and and go get a degree or an advanced degree. And you are able to put in a certain amount tax-free every year. So if a family has started a 529 plan, and I always say it's never too late, even if the child is going to college next year, put $3,000 in and at least, save a quarter of it because you didn't have to pay taxes on that amount. So if you've put money into a 529 plan, how does that factor into a financial aid award?
Yeah, it's counted as the parent's asset. So the parent's assets are counted at the rate of 5.64%. So if you have $100,000 in a 529 plan, it's like $5,640. So it's not going to hurt you. There used to be a lot of rigmarole when the grandparent had the funds. The grandparent would transfer the ownership to the parent so that it didn't result as a gift to the student and considered at the rate of 25 or 35%, depending on the formula. But now the Department of Education, as a result of the Consolidation Act of 2020, it's just going to be looked at as the parent asset. So it's only going to be looked at whether, the student is going to be asked, do you have a trust? Do you have a 529? Do you have a UTMA, a UGMA? That is different because then the student's asset is assessed at 25% at a federal under FAFSA, and at a private school, 35%. But otherwise, if the parent has a 529, it's a parent asset and it's assessed at the lower rate of 5.5%.
I think that's a great point, Claire. There are a lot of families who think that putting assets in the child's name is actually beneficial, and it may be that way for taxes, but it doesn't work that well when you're applying for need-based financial aid because colleges expect that parents might have other responsibilities, but they really want students to put skin in the game, and they want students to be putting their savings and their assets and their earning potential to work for their own college education. Claire, can you talk a little bit about how this works for blended families? So if parents are divorced, who's responsible for completing these forms? How hard do you have to work to track down a parent that you might not have a relationship with? How does it factor in for a school that's a FAFSA only school, as a state university might be, versus a private school that's going to ask for additional forms like the College Scholarship Service profile?
Yeah, so if a family is separate, a blended family, up until the 2023-24, what counts is where the student lives. So only one parent files a FAFSA, and it's the parent with whom the student lives with the most. So there are 365 days in the year. There's got to be, it's an odd number, there's got to be half a year where the student lives with one parent more than the other. Usually it's, if the parent earns less, then of course the expected contribution will be lower. However, because of this Consolidation Act, in 2023-24, it will change. So the assessment will be that the parent who contributed the largest amount of financial support will be the one who will file the FAFSA. So that will be the change. That's if a school uses the FAFSA form only. If you're talking about UNC Chapel Hill, Emory, Furman, Wofford, Wake Forest, if you're talking about BU, BC, Northeastern, they all use the CSS profile. So the CSS profile will look at the custodial parents and the non-custodial parents. So they essentially want to see the same amount of information from both biological parents or partner and the other family. Potentially 4 people's information will be required. That is the CSS profile. If a student truly has no contact with their parent, then there should be some documentation about that. And then that parent will be exempted. I mean, if the student can't find the parent or the parent, but that doesn't mean that the parent doesn't want to be bothered completing the CSS profile and therefore doesn't want to do it. Unwillingness is not an excuse, in other words, because you can divorce your spouse, but you can never divorce your child. According to the formula, you divorced or not, both sets of parents, whether they're adopted parents, they have to contribute to the education of this child so that both families' income and assets are going to be evaluated.
And some families find that when they're in a situation where there is animosity between parents, that going to a FAFSA only school, a school that only uses the FAFSA, and there's one parent who is providing primary physical and financial support, that's the best match for them, rather than a school that is asking for the student to track down a parent that they may not want to engage with, and that the student has to take responsibility for that can be very difficult. I think it's important to know that there are questions on these forms that seem so basic, but they can really bring up a lot of strong feelings. And so as a family, if you can think a little bit about the expectations for cost and set a budget and have some really open and honest conversations about that before it gets to be decision time, you will do yourselves a really good favor, because then you know what it is you have to spend, and the student can learn to make wise choices with those resources. Someone asked about which tax year is being considered. Claire, so can you just explain what prior means?
Right. Yeah. The FAFSA, this is year 2022. The FAFSA information will come from your prior year 2020. So when you do file FAFSA, there is a data retrieval tool that is hooked up to the IRS, which will download your prior year income tax returns and populate the correct fields on FAFSA. They will be covered off. They're all blackened out. So your child will not be able to see what was your adjusted gross income 2 years ago. Now, that is income from 2 years ago. Colleges know that. If your situation changed because of COVID, or you lost your job, or what have you, life is tough, you can then talk with your financial aid administrator about what has changed. And of course, if you're filing the CSS profile, they already have your FAFSA information, but they will also ask for your average income they can ask you for anything before they release their institutional aid. So they might ask you from last year's, they might ask you the current year's income and what you expect to receive in the future. So the institutional methodology is very careful about evaluating that horizontal equity. Families in the same situation should get the same amount of aid, and families in different situations should get a different amount of aid, if that makes sense.
And just we have a couple of questions about timing. So you cannot apply for need-based financial aid until you are enrolling in college. So you don't complete the FAFSA until it opens, which is October 1st of a student's senior year in high school. You can also apply for FAFSA while you're in college, even if you didn't do it while you're in high school. Families' financial situations can change, and that's why you reapply for financial aid every year, or have the opportunity to do so. So that's to answer specifically sort of when it starts. But if you want to get a sense of what that expected family contribution would be, as Claire was mentioning before, there are some good estimators out there, but always when you're on the internet, be careful of your source. So I recommend using something that has a .gov email address if you can, because then you know you're working with something that's related to the federal government. The FAFSA, which we've talked about several times, it's the free application for federal student aid, FAFSA. The first F stands for free, which means you should not be asked to pay to apply for that, to complete that form, though there are people you can pay to help you complete it. It's actually pretty easy to do when you've done your taxes for the year, so please don't be frightened about it. You can also do something called the FAFSA forecaster. They don't make it as available as they used to, but if you your Google machine will help you find it. But Student Aid is a really great website and has a very good estimator on it. And I think my colleague Stephanie put that in the chat, so you can follow up with that.
The federal government does not allow anyone to charge for filling out FAFSA, so that if you do have any problems, there's a 24/7 FAFSA resort line, which I'm going to find in my book because it's an 800 number. And also the FAFSA forecaster had gone away. Now this year, for the first time, it's back on FAFSA. So if you go on fafsa.ed.gov, you'll see a FAFSA forecaster, so you can get your federal expected contribution right there and then. And then the other thing is that even the College Board, if you file the College Board CSS profile, it's $25 for the first one and $16 for each additional one. But this year, the CSS profile says if your income is $100,000 or less, there's no charge. So you could file 10 CSS profiles if your income tax is less than 100,000, and it won't cost you a penny. So have at it. Go for it.
Let's talk a little bit about outside scholarships and how they can impact a need-based financial aid package.
Okay, so if a college, the largest scholarship is really a tuition discount given to students that the college wants. So if a student gives if a college gives a student a $15,000 scholarship and the tuition is, let's say, $65,000, that means that the student is probably at the top quarter of their applicant pool in terms of GPA, grades, test scores. And when you apply to colleges, you should always look at that, at the grades and test scores that they accept, and try to be near the top, like top quarter, but a top quarter would be great because you're going to be treated preferentially. The colleges discount the tuition that way, and you can maintain a C+ average and have that $15,000 for 4 years, which will be $60,000. So that's a significant reduction in tuition, and expensive colleges do that. So let's see, what was the second question?
We were talking about if you win an outside scholarship.
Yeah, if you win an outside scholarship, let's say you work at Chick-fil-A and you get the $2,000 scholarship, the colleges have the prerogative to say, okay, we gave you $15,000, now we can just give you $13,000 because you already have $2,000. And that's where you can appeal. You can simply file an appeal. And I've been always very successful with that. But you just go to the financial aid administrator and say, hey, look, I worked mighty hard to get this outside scholarship. Please apply it to my loan or to my books and supplies or what have you. But make sure that it's applied to a self-help portion of your financial aid package, such as the loans. You can do that. I've also had success with petitioning for in-state tuition when parents were divorced. One lived in Massachusetts, the other one lived in Pennsylvania. The student went to school in Pennsylvania, and the dad filed an appeal, which was right on the college's website, and he did get in-state tuition, which was a huge break. Saved that family about $20,000 a year. So don't be afraid to ask. You're not going to get if you don't ask.
That is a
You'd be
good.
surprised because financial aid administrators have a hard time determining what exactly can you pay, what's fair. So if you have a budget and you're raising legitimate issues of affordability, chances are you're going to get something.
And is that true also for high income families? Are high income families just kind of left out in the cold from the need-based process, or is there a level at which, sort of your income is just too high to be considered, or your assets are too high to be considered?
I have a colleague who says, file FAFSA, whether you need a ton of money, whether you have some money, and whether you have a lot of money, just to let the college know that you have a lot of money. And the college may be salivating, hoping that you will become a donor or maybe build up their football field or give them a new library or something. But yeah, there is no harm in filing FAFSA, but just don't expect any subsidized aid if your expected contribution is higher than the cost of attendance. So there are colleges that fill 100% of demonstrated need. So my students, the ones who are on free or reduced lunch, I encourage them to apply to those colleges, even if they're not valedictorian or salutatorian, because sometimes they've really had to overcome some serious obstacles. And these colleges that meet 100% of need, like Amherst, even Northeastern now is saying that it's meeting 100% of need, but certainly Swarthmore, these Bryn Mawr, they really meet 100% of need. So a student who needs a lot would do well there. Conversely, if your expected contribution is 80 or 90,000 and you're applying to MIT, the same college as Swarthmore, then you'll pay the whole amount. So if you're in a high income bracket, and it doesn't take much to have a high expected contribution, and I understand that many families cannot pay it, even though they make a good income, if you go to those colleges where they award need-based only and no merit scholarship at all, you're likely to pay the full sticker price. So you have to know, is the college right for me? Do they award some scholarship, some merit scholarship for my child so that I can get a tuition discount? Or do I need a lot of financial need, and do I need to do the best I can in school so that I can go to these colleges that will give me the funding that I need based on financial need?
Thank you.
Yeah, I did talk about that in.
Okay, we're getting close to the end. So let me try and squeeze in a few last questions. Does where a parent work have any relevance for an in-state versus out-of-state school?
It depends. You can't negotiate with University of Michigan. I've tried that, but there are other like other colleges like UNC Charlotte. Yeah, you talk with the financial aid administrator. They're looking at where are you paying your taxes, because if it's a public institution, it's the taxpayers of that state that are supporting that university. And if you're working in that state, you're probably paying taxes in that state. So yes, I'd go right ahead and make an appeal.
And I think this is a really great question. It was actually the first question that came in, but I think it's a great question to think about as we're closing up. Is it worth it when a college just costs a lot, right? It seems like there are some families that think, well, it's worth it if it's the name brandiest school out there, if it's one of the 8 members of the athletic conference that is known as the Ivy League, but it might not be worth it if it's a school that they haven't heard of before or don't know a lot of people who have gone to. Is a small private liberal arts college worth the $25,000, $75,000 a year?
Yeah, you really have to evaluate your student. Is your student able to take advantage of everything that this college offers? The return on investment on a liberal arts education in history, psychology, sociology, from you name it, William Baldwin Bates, I mean, they're excellent universities, but if your expected contribution is 80,000 and you're going to pay the whole thing, the question is the return on investment. Yes, there are many families who are more than happy to pay the full 85,000 to send their kid to MIT, Caltech, But these are technical schools, and my thought is they'll be able to earn it back. Whereas if you're sending your child to, I don't want to say names, but a liberal arts college and gets a degree in history, unless that student wants to become a professor, it's unlikely that he'll be able to make enough. So you got to look at the return on investment, save your money for grad school, and talk with your children. Students can be amenable to reason, especially I've seen that when I work with my students, they grow through the process and they come to realize what would be a good fit, where can they grow and thrive, regardless of the name recognition of the school.
And that is it, right? It's about finding a school that's a good fit for the student, that good soil where they can really grow into their whole selves, and that may come at a higher cost than you wish it would, but that's why it's really helpful to start, as Claire suggested, with a family conversation about your college cost budget, so that you know on the front end what you're willing to afford, so that that is not a heartbreaking conversation that you have to have at the end of the process. I think there's nothing more devastating than a student who thinks every school at any price point is possible, and they gain admission to some of those schools, and then the family says, gosh, I'm sorry, honey, you just can't go. And it would have been really easy to have had that conversation at the front end of the process.
Avoid that conversation between love and money.
Thank you so much for your time and your good advice tonight, Claire. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for your great questions and engaging in this conversation. We're excited for the adventures that you have ahead, and we are thrilled to be a part of it. At Appleruth, we help students with academic tutoring, with test prep, and as well as executive function coaching. So if there are ways that we can be directly helpful to you in this journey, we're delighted to, and we're glad to share great resources and ideas like the ones you've heard tonight. As I mentioned, you'll receive a recording and Claire's presentation, and we hope you'll join us for the other events that are planned in this College and Money series. Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Thank you so much, Ginger. Bye, everybody. Be well.